All right, welcome everyone. This is Ask a Master Food Preserver, the monthly first Wednesday of the month program that the UC Master Food Preserver online program sponsors. And tonight, whoops. Hi, I'm your MC. My name is Marina Shea. We have our Q&A and chat monitors are Elena Alvarez and Henry Shaw, also Master Food Preservers who'll be speaking. And the additional online program volunteers tonight are Paige Weiskirch, Tim Long, and I've mentioned Elena. Notice this program is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. And so you can bear that in mind when you speak. Zoom housekeeping, please keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. And when you leave the Zoom, you will get a little pop-up for a survey. And please, it will be very helpful for us if you answer that. We're just going to have a little brief introduction, and then this will be an open program, as we have every month, to explore any topics about food preservation that you wish. So just unmute your mics and speak on up, or if you want, you can raise your Zoom hand. This is at least one way that your bar might be displaying the Zoom hand. You might have to go under React and then select Raise Hand, and we'll get to all the questions, we hope. If you prefer, see if I can manage to get this to advance. You can type in your questions or comments. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature, not the chat feature. And you can, again, open that from your menu bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It'll say Q&A, or perhaps if you're working in a smaller space or from your phone, you might need to click on more, the three little dots, and that'll give you a pull-up menu that will then let you get to Q&A. And then that is where you can type in your additional questions. Please, again, do not use chat except for if you're having a technical problem. And again, please just feel free to speak up as we get into this open program. A bit first, who are we? The UC Master Food Preserver online program is a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded volunteer program of the University of California Cooperative Extension that provides up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. So the disclaimer, of course, is that these views and thoughts and opinions are those of the speakers, and we are not actually speaking for the University of California. We are not endorsing or opposing any specific product or service. So for example, if you see a photograph or we have an example of a product that we use, that is not an endorsement. Our mission is to keep Californians and the public broadly safe and well as they use culturally appropriate, research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing engaging ways for Californians and the public to explore healthy food. So today's program is, as I said, an open Q&A, but we thought we would have a bit of a little introduction. And for that, we thought we would look at different types of canners. And there's lots of equipment out there, and they're used in different ways and sometimes overlapping in similar ways. And so with that, we've got a couple of different master food preservers who've rated their kitchen equipment. And I'm going to turn it over to Paige.
Thanks, Marina. Let's see. Hopefully you guys can see me. So yeah, as Marina said, in our previous Ask a Master Food Preserver, we got lots and lots of great questions from people about canners. So we thought this time we would start off with a quick introduction to three major sort of canning tools, the big types of canners, and just give you a brief overview of what they are. So I'm going to start off with talking about a water bath canner, and that's kind of, I think, the traditional canner we think of. And so I have a couple of them here. I have this one, and this probably looks really familiar. It's just a large pot. They're usually fairly lightweight. It has a lid, and on the inside, a rack for holding the jars. So this is sort of a very traditional purpose-built canner that is kind of pretty much all it does. And these do come in different sizes. So I have two. I have this one, which is as big as it is. It's actually the small one. And then I also have this one. It still has paper on it from many years ago. But this is kind of the traditional water bath canner. And then, so we also wanted to talk about today, though, that for some of this equipment, particularly the water bath canner, you don't actually need the purpose-built canner in order to do water bath canning. And so Elena is going to show us some alternatives.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. So I don't actually own a purpose-built water bath canner. I just use a giant stock pot. So this is actually just a very large stock pot. My family also uses it for refilling fish tanks when it's not being used as a canner. Similar to the purpose-built canner, it has a lid. And then I did choose to purchase a rack to fit the canner because I prefer this sheet metal style. But you can also use something like a rack for cooling cakes or for cooking turkeys or chickens. I did that for a long time. I just prefer the non-wire ones because I feel like the jars stay steadier when I put them in. But it's, again, not a requirement.
Thanks, Elena. And then actually to speak to that, so this is the example, this small one, I've used this just inside of a small stock pot when I've just wanted a can or use 1 or 2 jars. This is for cake, but it works great. And another thing you can use, because the goal of the rack is just to keep the jars from rattling around, which helps prevent breakage. So just anything on the bottom of the pot. So I've also used silicone oven mitts. Work great. So I just sink one of these and set the jars right on top of it, and that works too. And again, those are just things that we already have in our kitchen. So the second type of canner I want to talk about is a steam canner, specifically officially an atmospheric steam canner. And this is something some of you may be familiar with or you've not heard of. But a steam canner looks like this. So essentially, instead of filling a big pot full of water, right? So it has 3 parts, the lid, the dome. Underneath it is a fairly shallow pan with a rack inside. Water goes in, heat it up, lid goes on. This cavity fills with steam completely, and then the steam is used rather than immersing your jar in boiling water, you're immersing it in a steam environment. And these come in really only 2 varieties, either the kind that have an indicator on top. I don't know if you can see this, that gives me a sense of how much of sort of the level, how much steam is inside the pot. I do want to tell you, even with the indicator, we actually measure or determine whether or not the cavity is sufficiently filled with steam based on the amount of steam coming out of the vent, which is a little tiny hole. It's just right here. You can barely see it, but there's a vent hole. But mine does also have a second indicator that sort of is meant to give you a second way of sort of validating whether or not there's enough steam in there. But it's actually, again, the indicator on top is secondary to the flow of steam coming out of the vent. Elena, go ahead.
Mine, I have one that does not have an indicator on top. As you can see, it's essentially the same as Paige's. Mine is a little bit larger, but you can see it's the same dome style with the vent hole. Right, let's see if I can do this. Right here, it's very small. And then, try not to drop this on my floor. Same deal, rack with a shallow pan in the bottom.
The big advantage of the atmospheric steam canner is that it uses far less water. So they heat up faster and you use less water to begin with. So therefore it heats up much quicker, obviously less water to dispose of afterwards. And you're not having to reach in to a pot of boiling water to sort of remove jars. So I know they're becoming more and more popular. It's only recently that they've been approved for use in home canning as being safe. So now we're starting to see more and more of them on the market. They're all pretty much the same. Again, it's really that indicator on the top or not are the big differences, and that's sort of a personal preference. They all work the same way. Then the last kind of canner, sort of the biggie of all these, is the pressure canner. So these are, and pressure canners are generally pretty big. I have, and again, I want to make it clear that this is not, we're sharing the products we own. This is not an endorsement of any one of these. So I have one that's kind of got an interesting, what's interesting, the lid. So this one has a gauge on it that gives you, it's supposed to sort of tell you what the pressure is. But this is actually not what we call a dial gauge canner. This gauge is a secondary indicator. It's actually weighted gauge. It uses a weighted, mine has, we're going to show you kind of a couple different ones. So mine, the weight is sort of built in here. I don't actually have anything I take off and remove. I just turn a dial, but it isn't still using weight. And then steam comes out of this and I get a steady flow of steam. And that's how I know that I'm at the correct pressure to safely can food in this. And again, this is used for low acid foods. So the steam canner and the water bath canner are for high acid canning. Pressure canner is for those low acid foods that need to get to a much higher temperature. But these come in lots of different styles and varieties. And so Elena has something quite different from mine.
Watch as I try to drop this on myself on live camera. Yeah, so the big difference between what Paige has and what I have is that I have a dial gauge canner. So for this canner, the dial on it actually is giving you the pressure inside. There is still a weight, but this is a 15-pound weight. So if I want to do a lower pressure than 15 pounds, I have to use the gauge. The important thing about dial gauge canners is that they do need to be calibrated yearly. So keep that in mind. You can always can with the 15-pound weight, and that's perfectly safe. You can can at a higher pressure than what's called for in the recipe. But your dial gauge does need to be calibrated annually.
And then just to demonstrate, Tim has also a weighted gauge, but different than what I have. So
this is a little awkward. It's heavy. This is an all-American canner. It is a weighted gauge. It's a vintage model. So originally it was a dial gauge canner. However, I was able to convert to a weighted gauge, which uses this little item here, which is a 5, 10, or 15 PSI gauge. Originally, this canner from the 70s had a petcock on it, which is when open would show the steam flow that you need to attain. And once the steam flow for 10 minutes is steady, then you would flip that down. And then from there, then you have to use the dial gauge to check your pressure. And the way you adjust the pressure on these is by changing the heat on your stove. Okay. This also does not have, this is a metal to metal. It does not have a seal like a Presto does. You can, yeah, good shot there. And as you noticed, it has wing nuts with 6 clamps around which hold the top down. My other canner is a Presto, also very vintage from the 70s. It's like Elena's. When I bought this just a few years ago from a friend, had the solid 15-pound weight. I found that from Presto, you could order a new weight that allows you to take a ring off. You can see the split in the ring there. There's comes with 3 rings, one at 5, one at 10, and one at 15, so you can adjust it and then not worry about the dial gauge because you've got the proper pressure set by the weighted gauge. This particular one, the first canner I showed you will hold 7 quarts or more than that in pints. This one is deeper. This is a number, I've forgotten, 21B, and it will hold 7 quarts or up to about 18 pints by double stacking. So it's a deeper canner. Okay.
great, thanks, Tim. And again, I didn't kind of show that, but so in this one, this lever is what's giving me that 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure. So mine, rather than having a physical weight, has a lever instead. And then I hadn't thought about that, but this one is a newer model. This particular one is T-fall, and it has a silicone gasket that helps with that seal. So the top just kind of pops on. And then the last thing I wanted to mention about pressure canners is that you can water bath can in a pressure canner, because you can water bath can in any large pot with a lid. And this is a large pot with a lid. And all of them, we didn't really show it, but all of them also come with racks. So that all the things you need to water bath can, you can do in a pressure canner. You would not need to necessarily lock the lid on. You certainly would, like in my case, you would leave this wide open so that steam continues to escape, because you're not trying to create pressure within the pot if you're just using it for water bath canning. But if you have a pressure canner, and then the other thing is, notice that all of us have sort of different age of these. These are one of those tools that, if taken care of, once you buy it once, it's unlikely you would need to buy it again. So they're a little bit of an investment. They come in a variety of price points. But once you have it, I think if you're taking care of it, again, this should last you a really long time. So not a terrible investment if pressure canning is something that you are interested in trying. Oh, you know, and one other thing I just want to do a backseat before we move on with questions is that back to water bath canners, I see them often, or the racks for them, secondhand. And as long as they're not rusted, there's no holes, because many of them are aluminum or enameled. There's no reason, again, you don't need to buy a brand new one. Something used should work just fine. It just needs to be able to hold water and have a lid. And you need some sort of something on the bottom, like a rack, to keep the jars from rattling around. If you can meet those 3 criteria, you're good to go.
That's
I'd
great.
like to add on used equipment like that, the 2 companies that I have, the Presto and the All American, I've been around so long, they're really good about having spare parts or replacement parts, even though these were 1970 vintage canners that I have, and I can still get replacement parts, including for the Presto, the ring seal for the inside.
Yeah, and I know even for my newer model, both the gaskets, again, T-fall is a company that's been around for a little while, but the gaskets and the racks and all of those things are pretty easily purchased individually online. So if the gasket gets dried out or something, they're pretty easy to find replacements for. The companies make it easy.
Great. Well, thanks,
Thanks.
Paige, Elena, and Tim. We can circle back around if people have more questions about canning equipment. But let's throw it open for questions of any sort for food preservation, freezing, dehydrating, canning, fermentation, you name it. And I should mention that we will have a number of programs coming up online free on pressure canning, on high acid canning, water bath canning, from both the online program and from some of the other California counties. And I'll give you some of those upcoming programs at the end of this one. Questions? Welcome.
I have a question.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi, I'm a master food preserver, and I've been canning a lot of marmalade because I have 2 citrus trees. And I found that I've tried many different, I think I've made 5 different kinds over the last couple of months. And I've tried pectin, non-pectin, pomona pectin, other pectin. And what I'm finding consistently, and I've also done long boil as well. And what I'm finding consistently is that the fruit and the rind seems to be floating up. And I know that, with regular jam, if the fruit isn't ripe, you get fruit float. But I'm having a hard time understanding why that would translate to citrus. So I'm just curious. I did a little research online, couldn't find any good answers to that question.
Panel. I have to say, Cindy, when I did my first, I did a Meyer lemon marmalade that had a little float in it. I did not have that problem with a long cook orange marmalade, but I do not know why.
Again, I'm gonna guess, so I have some marmalade right here, actually, that I just made in a steam canner. I guess is again, it's floating, that means there's air. So you said you've how long are you actually like cooking I'm curious about your recipe and how long you're cooking the rind, if you're boiling it in advance or soaking it, because there's gotta be, obviously, there must be air
Yeah.
sort of trapped, so
So
it's floating, so.
yeah, so I've tried several different recipes, some that with the long boil one, it was much less obvious. That one seemed to look more like the one that you were showing me, where you do it over a 2-day period of time. The rind soaks one day and then you can it the next day. But the pectin ones for sure, which I didn't cook as long because the recipes didn't ask you to cook them as long. That's where I really noticed much more dramatic float. Is it's causing me to believe that probably doing a pectin recipe for marmalade isn't a great idea.
Well, it shouldn't be necessary. Marmalade is great because oranges contain so much natural pectin that you just don't need to use pectin. You don't need to add it because there's so much there already. And you do need, though, that sort of longer cook in order to have that sugar syrup fully penetrate that orange rind.
The
And the other
orange
thing
rind
might
has
be,
to break down, basically.
yeah, it has to be
let
able to
the
break,
air
like,
escape.
exactly, it needs to fully cook in that, which again is going to prevent that. So, because yeah, you shouldn't, because I imagine with pectin, because that infects it affects the amount of time, because then you're having to use the prescribed time based on the kind of pectin you're using, and often that boil is much shorter. And I will say that I think orange, and this is a personal opinion, but orange or marmalades in general are not harmed by that long boil. Some people don't like that sort of cooked jammy. So if you have like a strawberry jam that cooks for a long time, it changes the flavor. It moves from that fresh strawberry flavor to a much more sort of caramelly cooked strawberry flavor. Marmalades are a little different. They really maintain that bright citrus flavor even with a long cook. So the it's again, they don't need pectin because I mean, commercial pectin is made often from either apples or citrus anyway. And that long cook is what's, again, allowing the cells of the rind to break down and the air to escape, as Henry stated, which is going to prevent float.
And a key to, an indicator of when that has happened is that the rind should be kind of translucent rather than opaque. Once the rind becomes translucent, you know that your sugar syrup is completely penetrated through the rind and the cells have broken down.
Well, thank you. I
And
think the takeaway for me then is to not use a recipe that involves pectin.
Yeah,
or just stir your jam afterwards. Your marmalade afterwards.
Yeah, the float doesn't hurt it.
Right. It doesn't look good.
Only for the fair, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
The answers, I did a little bit of research while we were talking there, and Kansas State University suggests using slightly underripe fruit can allow excess air to remain trapped in the fruit, and fruit that's not crushed enough might also cause a problem. And then they mentioned undercooking, but if you're doing a long cook, that probably isn't the issue.
Thank you.
And for anybody listening who doesn't know what we're talking about, fruit float is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you make jam and the fruit solids float up in the jar. I don't really have an example here, but this is actually just some canned cherries, but where you have the fruit floats up in the jar, and then you'll have usually a clear liquid towards the bottom. It is harmless. It all tastes good. You just need to stir it. The issue with it is purely aesthetic. So if that happens to you, enjoy your jam. It's perfectly fine.
More questions?
I have a question.
Go, Carlene.
Yes, you're talking about high acidity and low acidity. How do I determine high from low acidity?
There are lists
So-
of foods that are, do you want to go, Elena?
Yeah, so the short answer is there's a list. In general, most fruits are going to be high acid. Most vegetables, meats, beans, things like that are going to be low acid. The other thing is that we recommend using reputable recipes, and those will specify what type of processing needs to be done to get that food to be safely shelf stable.
Okay, so there's a list that I can find through your organization.
I would go to the
have one-
National Center for Home Food Preservation. And I'll post the link to that in chat.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, they have a lot of really wonderful resources.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If you're using a reputable recipe, it will tell you if you need to use pressure canning for those low acid foods. And most, like if you'll look, most, fruit jam recipes will be high acid canning. And so you're just using a regular boiling water or steam canner. But as long as you are using a reputable recipe from, say, Ball or an EDU or a .gov site, they will take into account the acidity and the safety needs.
So you said the high acid, I mean, I'll, obviously check my recipe, but in general, high acid foods like fruit can be water canned, but the low acid like vegetables have to be pressure
Yeah,
canned.
vegetables,
correct.
meats, soups.
Unless you are pickling the vegetables and adding a sufficient amount of vinegar or other acid to the vegetables.
I'm
which
going to
preserves them
post
then.
an additional, more specific National Center for Home Food Preservation link in the chat for you guys. That has a nice kind of more comprehensive list of stuff. It's kind of hidden in the text, but it's in there.
And then again,
Okay.
the reason that the panel is mentioning reputable recipes is that the recipes themselves are developed to make sure that the acidity of the final product. So just because something is considered high acid or low acid doesn't mean that when you pickle it or can it, particularly not pickling but canning, you might need to add, for example, lemon juice, or it'll call for adding a little bit of vinegar. And that's because those recipes are designed to make sure or to take into account the natural variation in things like fruit. So while generally we would consider strawberries to be a high acid food, strawberries vary from strawberry to strawberry, variety to variety. And so recipes, for example, for strawberry jam often call for a little bit of lemon juice. And specifically, we ask for canned lemon juice or bottled because it has a guaranteed acidity. Because again, lemons also vary greatly. And so again, that reputable recipe, they've taken all this into account to make sure that whatever you're making is going to be safe to, say, water bath can. And then also the good recipes, reputable recipes will tell you when things have to be pressure canned, when water bath canning isn't safe. And I'm going to go just another 2 cents. We've been seeing a lot lately. I'm kind of on this, recipes for things like water bath canning butter. Which has no acid in it. So again, why it's really important that you're following a reputable recipe, not necessarily a popular recipe.
Paige just wrote up a thing for our Facebook and Instagram sites on, why water bath canning of cream cheese is not a good idea.
Thank you.
I did want to pick up on one thing that Paige mentioned also, which is commercial lemon juice and commercial lime juice. Again, the acidity levels in natural fruit vary so much that when the acid in a recipe is reliant on either lemon or lime juice or vinegars, you want to make sure that you're using a commercial product. And vinegars themselves also vary widely in their percentage of acid. So, rice wine vinegars, just a regular white distilled or an apple cider vinegar, they can all be different. And so make sure, again, your recipe, if your recipe calls for, like a 5% acidity level, that you're using, you read the label on the vinegar you're buying. Paige has got.
Well, just to Marina's point, so here's a bottle of brown rice vinegar. And if I look at the label very carefully in very small, hard to read print, it's actually only 4.5% vinegar. So if I were to use this in a canning recipe, I would actually not be acidifying my liquid to the level to make sure that it's safe. So it's just really important that we don't think like, oh, vinegar is acid and it's all the same. It's different when it's for flavor. When you're making a salad dressing that you're going to eat right away, when you're making anything you're going to eat right away, it's less important. And then it's all about flavor. And I know lemon juice is a sticking point because, so many of us, especially here in California, have access to so much fresh fruit. And we always think, oh, fresh is better. Fresh is better. But the goal here that the lemon juice and the lime juice are not being added just as a flavoring ingredient. They're actually an important safety component. And so even if you're thinking like, I can't believe I'm buying bottled lemon juice, when it comes to canning, we want to use bottled lemon juice. Fresh lemons are great when it's simply a flavoring ingredient, or something you're going to eat right away. If you're going to make something and eat it immediately or just put it right in the fridge, then it's different. But for making something shelf stable, it's super important.
It's also important when you're making jams and jellies because pectin needs a certain range of pH, right? Certain range of acidity in order to gel properly. If it's too acid, then you'll get a very tight gel and it will weep. And if it's not acid enough, it won't gel.
Similarly, sugar is part of a jam recipe. It wasn't until I started hanging out with the master food preservers that I learned that I'm not just allowed to randomly cut back the sugar because I wish I didn't have as much of it. If you want to do canning for shelf stable products, the sugar is an important part of both the the gelling process and the and safety. More questions? Topics of interest?
Actually, I have another question.
Please.
I recently got a water steamer canner, and it seems like the lid rattles and it doesn't sit real tight and it kind of spits water out. Is that normal, or do I have like a defective steam canner?
I had the same experience when I first got my steam canner, and I remember talking with some more experienced MFPs. And so if it is rattling wildly, then you just have the heat up too high. So you just need to turn down, and that's the thing with a steam canner. So we're talking again about this atmospheric steam canner, one of these. They're pretty lightweight. I mean, this is made out of, mine's aluminum. I did a spring for the stainless steel version. So this thing is pretty lightweight. And so the pressure from the steam does get it sort of rattling, and it's kind of steam seems like it's coming out everywhere. And part of learning to use one of these is you're going to need to experiment a little bit and figure out that point that keeps the water at a low boil, but isn't having it rattle everywhere. However, I have found that if I just set not something really heavy, because again, I'm not trying, if my stove is too high, you need to turn it down. But sometimes I'll just take something like an empty canning jar with a little bit of water in it and just set it on top.
Okay.
And that's enough weight to stop that from bouncing all over the place. If that isn't sufficient, if something lightweight like this is not sufficient, then your heat's too hot and you just need to turn it down a little bit. Because what matters is that you're getting that 7 inches of steam coming out of the vent hole. As long as that's happening, you have enough steam. You don't have to have the water at a sort of a rolling boil the whole time. Right? But I totally know what you mean, because mine does the same thing where it's sort of like moving a little bit and rattling. So play with the temperature a little bit. And then I have found that just taking, like, I find an empty canning jar. I like something that's heat safe, because the top of this gets really hot.
Yeah.
So something that can handle the heat. And I just set it on top. And that is usually enough to put a stop to that.
Yeah, it makes a watery mess on the stovetop. Even though I try to turn it down, I don't want it to go below.
And I have hard water where I live. So of course that mess also turns into like mineral deposits I have to clean up. So I'm totally with you.
As our mentor, Sue Mossbacher says, your boiling shouldn't be like a heavy metal rock band. It should be smooth jazz. It should be gently boiling.
Okay, thank you.
Arlene, does your steam canner have a gauge on top?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because the gauge, at least on mine, has a range for, 1,000, over 1,000, several, the three basic ranges that we think of as the 5, 10, 15 PSI type range. And if it's pegging out all the way to the right-hand side on its highest point, then you probably just need to turn the heat down.
Right. No, I've got it in the right range according to the gauge, but I need to watch that steam hole as well. I didn't realize how important that steam is coming out that vent hole.
You
It's
can put
actually
a piece
kind
of
of the other
black.
way around. Yeah, it's the other way around. The steam hole is how you tell. The gauge is like a bonus.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
So if, for example, the gauge is saying you're in the right range, but you don't have a steady, a good like 6-7 inches of steam coming out. And actually, we're gonna post on Instagram. I made a video of kind of what that looks like, and I'll post that on Instagram. But if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what the gauge is saying. You just don't have enough steam coming out of it. So it's really the steam coming out of the vent hole that's the most important. But it doesn't need to be, again, so strong that the lid feels like it's gonna, bounce off. It just needs to be a good, nice, steady stream of steam coming out of there, almost like something is like it's blowing it out. And the gauge is secondary. It's nice,
Oh,
but it's the
okay.
steam that matters.
Okay.
You can actually use a digital thermometer, the pointy type that you stick into a piece of meat and stick it in that hole and see what the temperature is like. And it should be somewhere around 212 at boiling.
Okay. 212. Okay. Thank you.
At sea level.
At sea level.
Okay.
Sorry, I work at sea level all the time. I forget that part.
More questions? Our Q&A is very, very quiet, but again, just feel free to unmute and speak up.
Any of our attendees canned or preserved anything lately?
Well, my Q&A says that the host has Q&A turned off. I don't know why.
Ah. Let us attempt to
I will take a
address
look
that.
at that really quick.
Thank you.
So while we're waiting for that, one of the things I did we were talking about this beforehand, is that when it comes to getting kind of started, and I know I saw from those of you who are registered for this, some of you labeled yourselves as novices. So for those of you who are kind of new to canning, again, you don't have to buy a lot of special equipment, but we all kind of agreed that if you're going to buy one thing when you start water bath canning, the thing we recommend you buy is a jar lifter. Jar lifters, it's a little device like this. And it literally, let me see here if I can get this up high enough so you can see. I have a jar. So I have a jar, it goes over the top, and you lift jars out. And it's so you can safely lift jars out of either, again, even a steam canner, even though it releases all the steam when you open the lid, they're super hot. Out of pressure canners, out of water bath canners, you got a lot of hot water, and it's, there is a risk to burning yourself. So and we were laughing before, because when I first started, I tried using tongs wrapped with rubber bands, all kinds of stuff. And all of that was really precarious. And I feel lucky that I kind of got away without hurting myself. And you can purchase, they make like really basic versions of this and really fancy. And in my humble opinion, there's no need for a fancy one. They all do the same thing, which is just simply they've got a little silicone and they can use to easily move things out without having to submerge your hands. You can also buy silicone gloves like this, so you can literally reach in and grab. I don't love this because you can still feel the heat of the water. It's not burning you, but it's not comfortable. And these are far more expensive. You can get a basic jar lifter for I think $5 or $6 at most sort of big box type stores or whatever. And again, you can spend a lot of money on this, but you don't have to. A cheap one does the same thing an expensive one does. And it is the one thing that I think you do want because it's safe. Sorry, my dog's drinking right below me.
Thanks, Paige. I should note that those jar lifters are also quite handy if you're just sterilizing jars, and you might want to do that if you're doing freezer canning, and or something that you're going to hold in the refrigerator for a while, like a curd, and so it's still useful for handling things. Our Q&A is now open wonderfully, and our first question in there, which Elena is going to take on, is, can I use my Instant Pot as a pressure canner? Incredibly important question. Thank you, Sarah.
So the short answer is no. Electric multi-cookers like Instant Pots are not recommended for pressure canning. You don't really know what's going on in there. They're kind of a black box. And they typically, for one, don't have the volume necessary to be a pressure canner. So there is a kind of minimum volume for pressure canners. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But the amount of time that it takes for them to heat up and cool down is also factored into the processing of that food. So no, we do not recommend canning in Instant Pots or any other of the electric multi-cookers, even if they do have canning buttons on them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the standard on the size is they need to be able to hold at least 4 jars.
4 quart jars, I think, is the
right.
I think you're right, Tim.
Also,
The
the
other issue-
temperature isn't regulated. So on an Instapot, it goes off and up and down the whole time. Where in a pressure canner, it's a steady heat.
And Instant Pots only go to 10 PSI
Yeah.
gauge. And if you had to do the 15-pound, you can't get there.
And that actually
There are electric canners, pressure canners now that are specifically pressure canners. I haven't used one. I don't know that much about them, and the FDA hasn't actually checked them, but the manufacturer assures us that but they haven't shared their data yet, I think.
No, they haven't shared their data yet. I understand that there is some research that's getting done possibly this year into them by one of the other extension offices. So I'm hoping that we get some more info about them soon.
And my understanding is that people are being told to be sure you follow the recipes provided by the manufacturer of that particular device, because in theory they have tested, although we don't know that for sure because the USDA hasn't followed up with it yet.
If you recall, when we were first talking about pressure canners and we were all showing off on the tops of these, how they all have some way to set the pressure. That's the issue with Instapots, is there's no way to know for a fact that even if they say it's 10 PSI, which is not going to be helpful if you're above 1,000 feet, but you don't know that. The whole point of the pressure canner is that you have a way to regulate the pressure, which you cannot do in an Instapot, which is, again, that's kind of the key thing, and it just doesn't do that.
Great. We have another question, which I think it translates to a lot of different recipes that we might want to be making. If a recipe asks for 4 large poblano peppers or 1 large onion, how do I know the correct measurement if no weight of vegetable is stated? We were just having the, wow, why don't US recipes do everything by weight instead of volume?
Yeah, the eternal challenge. Some recipes will give an about however many pounds of vegetables as purchased as part of the recipe ingredients list. I know that my Ball Complete Guide has a table in the back of like about how much weight of produce you need to purchase for however many cups in this chopped. So I do use that to guide a little bit. But otherwise, if things are being specified as loosely as that, you go with, you know, whatever 4 large poblano peppers at your grocery store looks like. It's a little bit confusing and frustrating because a lot of the time everyone's like, canning needs to be very precise. It's a science. And then we have these recipes that are like a large onion. And onions vary a lot.
You can go to Bernardin, which is Ball Canning's Canadian site. That's their name in Canada, and they have recipes, but they do use metric weights, but they still have things like 1 liter of peaches as opposed to like how many pounds. So you still kind of run into some of that. It's a little bit better, but we all have commented at least once on why can't these things be in weights instead of volume measurements. So we feel you.
Yeah, since it's a ball recipe, I would check and see if there's a table in the back to see if they have like an estimate that they're using. And if not, just 4 large poblano peppers.
Thanks, Colleen. More questions? Got time for a few more. Anybody want to contribute their favorite thing that they preserved recently in using any kind of method?
I will.
Great. Thanks, Kathy.
Hi. Yeah, so I recently, I'm going to be teaching a class. I'm a master food preserver in Riverside, San Bernardino, and I'm teaching a pickling class. So I made the one of my favorites, which is the pickled corn in the ball book. Pickled corn, and I think it has and pickled corn and peppers. I think that's what it's called, or home style pickled corn. Very good. And I did use the clear gel with it this time. It's one of those few recipes that you can use flour. That's one of those that if you look in the USDA book, it's very few recipes that have that as a thickener. But this time I decided to use clear gel. I like to have a little bit thickener in there. So that's a really good recipe. So if anybody's looking for something good, like a relish or something like that, that's a good one. And then the other thing I'd made, which was really delicious, and I'd had my eyeball on it, is on the Ball website. And it's the salty pickled edamame. And you made me think about it when you were talking about the rice wine vinegar. Because yes, it's only I think it's 4.3% or 4.5. But it is a refrigerator pickle.
Mm-hmm.
So it has ginger and garlic and edamame, mirin and rice wine vinegar. And there was the option to put in toasted sesame oil. So of course I did that because it adds so much flavor. But if you haven't made it, or if you guys are like edamame, or the picture is so pretty, and it's something I want to have as a salmon bowl with that edamame on top. It's really delicious. So just wanted to share that with everybody. If you're looking for something interesting.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
And I just wanted to note, if canning feels like too much rigmarole, and you said, well, I'm interested in food preservation, but this whole canning thing just seems like way too much. You can always put things in jars, whether they're canning jars or not, and put them in the freezer, as long as it's a freezer safe jar or a plastic container that's designed for that. And that, of course, is probably the most common method of food preservation we use, which is, refrigeration and freezing. That is a way of keeping things.
I'll actually share something interesting that I pickled recently, just edamame, by the way, that sounds great. I have, this is actually pickled kelp.
I recognize
So,
that.
yeah, Marina and I are both fans. This is actually a recipe from the University of Alaska's Cooperative Extension. So this is a sort of a bread and butter pickled, or this is, pardon me, this is not the bread and butter. This is sort of a dill pickled kelp. So this is bullwhip kelp that I'm fortunate enough to live right by the ocean, so I can get it nice and fresh. And it's delicious. It's good for you. And yeah, so it's kind of something interesting that I've been pickling lately.
That's very
Recently did a
interesting.
batch.
Do you have a link for that by chance?
I
Yeah.
will pull that up.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
get the
While
thank
university.
we move on.
And another good thing to do with that, the bullwhip kelp bodies is to make a salsa, and that also is in, I think, the same University of Alaska
Oh, University of Alaska. Okay,
um,
thank you.
recipe.
Interesting.
Yeah, because those are recipes that are tested and designed and are safe for shelf-stable canning. Another great
Mhm.
thing to do is with the fronds, which I think in many ways are tastier than the bulb on a bullwhip kelp, is to just dehydrate them, and they make great chips.
Yum.
Or you could dehydrate them and then pulverize them in a coffee grinder and make a nice salt, sort of a seaweed salt.
Nice.
We have a question. How do you know how much headspace when freezing in a jar? Will it explode?
It's a great question. Generally, it kind of depends on the container. So some jars, like this one, which is a half pint full of marmalade that's been sitting on my desk for a month, have completely straight sides. So there's not what we call a shoulder. Do I have a jar with a shoulder today? I do not. Paige does. So you can see on Paige's jar, her jar curves inward right there. So if a jar is going to break during freezing, it's usually going to be at that shoulder. So for a straight-sided jar, the recommendation is 1 inch from the top of the jar for headspace. So it has space to expand. And it's also recommended that you use a straight-sided jar or other container. I don't typically freeze things in jars. They take up more space. I prefer to use those like round plastic deli containers for freezing.
So I noticed Kathy, was from another MFP program, and so I wanted to just mention that there are a number of California counties that have master food preserver programs, some of which meet and have live programming and sort of hands-on sometimes events. We of course are the online program, and we do all online, but many of our counties also do various online programs. And I wanted to just share a couple of the upcoming programs that are coming in the following, in this month. And you can also note the site for being able to see where to find our upcoming programs, because events are constantly being added, some live, some online. These are the free online upcoming programs, at least that are currently booked. Again, new programs are added all the time. We do have How to Can Condiments at Home, Spreading the Flavor. That's an event that is a joint project of the San Mateo and San Francisco County Master Food Preservers. That's tomorrow. If you really just want more canning, and if you want to do an hour with us every single day, you can do an hour and a half again on Friday. Mushroom Mania, Preserving the Flavor. San Joaquin County is going to talk about preserving mushrooms. Amador County has a long pressure canning online workshop coming up near the end of the month on March 25th. Our online program will be back with Funky Cabbage. This is the first of a two-part program on fermentation. Sauerkraut and kimchi is going to be on March the 27th. There'll be another program on kombucha in April. And then we are going to come back with high acid canning. And so you'll get to see some of those boiling water and steam canners in use for our high acid canning program on March the 30th, and then there will be a second part on canning that will talk about pressure canning, and that's those low acid foods that will be scheduled in April. And then, of course, our regular Ask a Master Food Preserver program. Some of the counties have these as well, but again, always on the first Wednesday of the month, unless we need to reschedule. You can also see past events by going to the past online events link, and it'll be the recorded Zooms and the various PowerPoint packs and recipes and so on from our past programs. There are many more ways that you can become involved with Master Food Preservers, and some of them have been mentioned already. We have a monthly newsletter. You can simply sign up, and it'll have little tips and recipes and so on. We have a Facebook page. Please do come on and get regular posts and also like us there. You can follow us on Instagram. You can also submit questions to our help desk if you don't want to wait around until the first Wednesday of the month to come ask a live question. You can submit a question via email, and it will come on or via the survey link, and then there will be a response to you. And then finally, if you are interested in becoming a Master Food Preserver yourself, there's a training every spring that's done by county and also for the online program. And you can bear that in mind. The application process starts in the fall. And then finally, I just want to note that when you do sign off of this Zoom, you will get that little pop-up. It's a very quick little survey, and it's super helpful for us. We are a grant-funded program. Even though we're all volunteers, we need to collect information, and we need to know more about what will be helpful for you. So we really appreciate in advance that your time and feedback. So any last questions? We've got a couple of minutes. Thank you so much to everyone for your interest and attention, and you other Master Food Preservers out there for sharing your thoughts and questions. All right. I think with that, we'll leave this program open for just a few more minutes if you want to copy any of the links that have been posted in the meeting chat. To be able to sign up and keep up with us. Any last?
I just wanted to say thank you for the information today.
Thanks, Kathy. Do you guys have programs coming up?
We do. I do a lot of work with, I live in Norco, California, and we have an agricultural center here. And so I'm doing a year-long program with them, doing monthly classes, teaching various steps of canning. And I do a quarterly introduction to introduction to food preservation with them quarterly, which has been really successful. We get about, on average, 70 people who attend that on one Monday every 3 months, which is kind of fun. Yeah, it's really nice. So yeah, we have a few things coming up. So.
A live program, that one?
Yes. Oh yeah, everything is live.
Yeah,
everything I do is live, and that we're doing here in Riverside. Yeah. Great. So it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. And this is new? Is this whole online program new? I didn't know.
Well, the first group of online Master Food Preservers were organized under the grant last spring of 2024. Okay. And there's a big class going through right now as well.
Fabulous. That's great. I attended something recently that you did. So it was the citrus class. And I got some really good ideas from that because I'm going to be teaching a citrus class at some point too. So I popped in and learned a few things from you and got some good ideas. And so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. There are 3 parts to that. So if you missed any of them, you can find them.
I missed 1 and 2. I missed 1 and 2.
Those were the big ones.
Go back and look online.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that you still have those recordings up online. So I did go back and look at those. So yeah, I'm really enjoying your online classes that you guys are doing. So thanks for welcoming me.
Great.
You have a great evening. Thank you.
Too.
Alrighty.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. And if you If you want, the recording of the program will be posted eventually on our page, and we hope to see more of you. Thanks.